The rain fell in sheets, a gray curtain blurring the world into a watercolor wash of streetlights and steel. Exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my eyelids, sinking into my bones. Midterms had been a special kind of hell, and my shift at the campus library had bled late into the night.
All I wanted was my bed.
The notification on my phone glowed. Your ride is arriving. I peered through the downpour, spotting the sleek black sedan pulling up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Right on time. I yanked the door open, a gust of wind and rain chasing me inside. Thank you so much for waiting, I mumbled, shucking my drenched light pink backpack and slumping into the cool leather seat. The interior was silent, immaculate, smelling faintly of cedar and expensive, clean air. It was nicer than any rideshare I'd ever been in. Premium, I guessed. My luck. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, the city's lights smearing into long, hypnotic trails. My eyes fluttered shut. Just for a second. A subtle shift in the car's motion pulled me from the shallow depths of sleep. We weren't moving anymore. My eyes cracked open, heavy and slow. We were parked in an underground garage, the kind of polished concrete and stark lighting reserved for buildings I only ever walked past. Panic, cold and sharp, jolted through me. This wasn't my student apartment building. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. And that's when I saw him. He was in the seat right beside me, a place that should have been empty. He hadn't been there when I got in. Or had he? My memory was a rain-soaked blur. He was stillness personified, a man carved from shadow and discipline. He wore a Tom Ford suit, the charcoal wool so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His hands rested on his knee, one over the other. They were elegant, long-fingered, but carried an unmistakable sense of capability, of strength held in absolute reserve. A Patek Philippe watch gleamed at his wrist, a quiet statement of wealth that screamed louder than any logo. He was looking straight ahead, at the concrete wall, but I knew, with a primal certainty that raised the hairs on my arms, that he was aware of my every breath. "Where are we?" My voice was a shaky whisper. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes found mine. They were dark, so dark they seemed to swallow the light, and held a chilling lack of emotion. They weren't cruel. They were worse. They were analytical, assessing me like a problem to be solved, an asset to be catalogued. "A change of plans," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and measured, with no trace of surprise or annoyance. It was the voice of a man who was never surprised, who bent the world to his will and called it a plan. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice gaining a thin thread of strength. "I think I got into the wrong car."
"I'm so sorry."
"My ride." "Your ride was cancelled," he stated, not as a guess, but as a fact. I had my driver take its place. The cold dread in my stomach solidified into a block of ice. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I fumbled for the door handle. It didn't move.
Locked.
I tried the other side. Nothing. The windows were seamless black glass from the outside. A cage. A very expensive, leather-upholstered cage. "What do you want?" I tried to keep my voice steady, to project a competence I didn't feel. My dark red college sweater suddenly felt childish, the worn denim of my jeans flimsy and inadequate. "For the next 2 hours, you want to be in your art history class, you're considering a semester abroad in Florence, and your father is a moderately successful architect from Chicago," he spoke as if reciting a weather report. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. "What are you talking about?" "I have a meeting," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "with a man who values the illusion of normalcy. He is bringing his daughter. It is advantageous for me to have a date. You will be that date." The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. He had, for all intents and purposes, kidnapped me to be his prop for a business meeting. "No," I said, the word barely audible. "Absolutely not. You can't do this. Let me out of this car right now." He didn't even blink. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. He placed it on the empty seat between us. $15,000, he said, his voice flat.
Cash.
For 2 hours of your time. You will sit, you will smile, you will say very little. And when it is over, my driver will take you wherever you want to go, and you will never see me again.
$15,000.
The number hung in the air, electric and obscene. It was more than my tuition for the entire year. It was enough to pay my mother's medical bills, to fix the leaking roof in her house, to breathe for the first time in years. It was a fortune, and it was a threat. Money like that didn't come without strings, strings that could wrap around your neck. And if I say no? I challenged, my chin lifting. For the first time, a flicker of something that wasn't complete indifference entered his eyes. It was a cold, hard glint of pragmatism. Then you have a problem, he said softly. You have seen my face. You are sitting in my car. In my world, that makes you a liability. I would be forced to deal with that liability in a much less profitable way for you. The unspoken threat was perfectly clear. He wouldn't just let me go. I looked from the envelope to his unyielding face. He held all the cards. I had stumbled into a world I didn't understand, governed by rules I couldn't begin to fathom. Survival instinct took over. I thought of the eviction notices, the calls from debt collectors, the crushing weight that was my constant companion. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. 2 hours. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A wise decision. He then produced a small, velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a delicate white gold bracelet, studded with tiny, brilliant diamonds. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Put this on, he commanded. My hands shook as I took it. It was cold against my skin. As I fumbled with the clasp, his hand covered mine. His fingers were cool and firm, his touch sending a jolt through my system that was equal parts fear and something else, something I refused to name. He fastened the clasp with an efficient click. It settled on my wrist, glittering under the car's interior light. It felt less like a gift and more like a collar. The car began to move, gliding silently up a ramp and into the night. We pulled up to the valet of a restaurant so exclusive I didn't even know it existed. It was all glass and dark wood, with men in sharp suits standing guard at the door. The valet opened my door, his face a mask of professional deference. The man beside me, my captor, my employer, looked at me one last time. My name is Kwon Min-jun. And your name, he said, his eyes locking onto mine, is whatever I tell you it is. He got out of the car, his movements fluid and economical. He stood there, waiting, his hand extended not in courtesy, but in command. Taking it was not a choice. It was the first step into a world from which I knew, with a terrifying certainty, I might never find my way back. The air inside Myeongwon was different. It was heavy with the scent of money, power, and something else, a low-humming tension that vibrated just beneath the surface of the polite chatter and clinking glasses. Men in suits nodded as we passed, their eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second before respectfully returning to Kwon Min-jun. No one smiled. They watched. Min-jun's hand rested on the small of my back, a proprietary gesture that was both a guide and a warning. His touch was light, almost impersonal, yet it burned through the fabric of my sweater. He moved like the room owed him space, and it parted before him as if by magic. We were led to a private room overlooking a meticulously sculpted garden, a slice of impossible serenity in the heart of the city. A portly, older man with a face like a cheerful bulldog rose to greet us. Beside him stood a girl who looked about my age, dressed in a Chanel dress that probably cost more than my car. The man was Mr. Park. The girl was his daughter, Jisoo. Min-jun, Mr. Park boomed, his smile not quite reaching his shrewd eyes. So good of you to come. And you've brought a guest. Mr. Park, Min-jun's voice was smooth as silk. This is Nia. A friend, he said the word friend, as if it were a foreign term he was testing out. I gave a small, polite smile, the one I used on difficult customers at the library. It's a pleasure to meet you. The dinner was an exercise in veiled threats and coded language. They spoke of shipping routes, new developments on the waterfront, and mutual acquaintances who had met with unfortunate circumstances. It was a chess match played with words, and I was a pawn, placed on the board for strategic advantage. I remembered my lines. I spoke of art history, of a fictional father in Chicago. Jisoo, the daughter, looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disdain, occasionally asking a pointed question about my university or my family that Minjun would deftly deflect. The conversation turned to family. "A man must be able to protect his own," Mr. Park said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Blood is the only thing that matters." Some learn this lesson too late. A tragedy. What happened to the old chairman's girl? Hannah, wasn't it? The name dropped into the conversation like a stone in a silent pond. For the first time all night, Minjun's composure fractured. It was a micro-expression, a tightening around his eyes, a flicker of something raw and unguarded that was gone as quickly as it appeared. But I saw it. It was pain. A deep, cavernous wound that his tailored suit and cold demeanor couldn't entirely conceal. He didn't respond, simply took a slow, deliberate sip of water, his knuckles white where he gripped the glass. He had failed to protect a woman named Hannah. That was his vulnerability. That was the crack in the marble. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of tension. The deal, whatever it was, soured. Voices remained low, but the polite facade crumbled, revealing the predatory steel beneath. When we finally left, the air was thick with unspoken animosity. As we stepped out into the damp night air, Minjun's hand tightened on my back. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice a low growl. We didn't wait for the valet. His driver was already there, the black sedan idling at the curb, its engine a quiet, powerful thrum. We had barely pulled away when I saw it in the rearview mirror, a pair of headlights, following too closely, too consistently. "We have company," the driver said, his voice as calm as his employer's. Minjun didn't even look back. He just stared straight ahead. "Lose them." The car surged forward, a beast unleashed. The city became a high-speed labyrinth of slick streets and neon lights. I gripped the leather seat, my knuckles white, my heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Another black car appeared, boxing us in. This wasn't a random chase. It was an ambush. Minjun was utterly calm, a pocket of stillness in the chaos. He gave quiet, precise orders to his driver, navigating the chase with the detached focus of a surgeon. A sickening crunch of metal on metal sent me lurching forward. The other car had slammed into our side. Minjun's arm shot out, a steel bar across my chest, pinning me to the seat and shielding me from the impact. His body was a solid wall between me and the window. For a terrifying second, my face was pressed against the fine wool of his suit, the scent of cedar and smoke and something uniquely him filling my senses. It was the most intimate contact we'd had, born not of affection, but of imminent violence. The driver performed a maneuver that defied physics, a controlled spin that threw our pursuers off balance. Tires screamed. We shot down a narrow alleyway, the walls a claustrophobic blur, and emerged onto a quiet, deserted street. We drove for another 10 minutes in absolute silence before pulling into the garage of a nondescript residential building. The driver killed the engine. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. "You can't go home," Minjun said, breaking the silence. His arm was still protectively braced in front of me. He didn't seem to notice. "They saw your face. They will assume you are important to me." "Important?" I laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "I'm a stranger you pulled off the street." "They don't know that," he said, finally retracting his arm. The space where it had been felt suddenly cold. "To them, you are now a weakness. A lever to be used against me." We went up to a penthouse apartment that was as minimalist and controlled as he was. It was a world of gray, black, and glass, with a view that owned the entire city. It was beautiful and utterly lifeless. "You can leave," he said, his back to me as he stood before the vast window. "My driver can take you to the airport. I can give you enough money to disappear, start a new life somewhere else. But they will look for you. And if they find you, I will not be there to stop them." He was giving me a choice that was no choice at all. Run and be hunted, or stay in the gilded cage with the monster who put me there. I thought of my mother, my tuition, my life, as messy and difficult as it was still mine. I wasn't ready to give it up and become a ghost. I'll stay, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was a choice made in a cage, but it was a choice nonetheless. My choice. He turned, and I saw a thin, deep gash on the back of his hand, beaded with blood, likely from the impact. He hadn't even flinched. "You're hurt," I said, nodding toward it. He glanced at his hand dismissively. "It's nothing. It'll get infected if you don't clean it." I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or the absurd reality of the situation. I walked to the cavernous, stainless steel kitchen, found a first aid kit in a drawer, of course he had one, and came back with antiseptic and a bandage. I held out my hand. "Give it to me." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, I thought he would refuse. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. I took it. His skin was cool, the cut deeper than I thought. I worked in silence, my movements deft and practiced from years of patching up my own minor injuries. My fingers brushed against his. The contact was electric. The silence in the room stretched, growing thick and charged. I was so close I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the almost invisible scar that cut through his left eyebrow. I finished wrapping the bandage, my fingers lingering on his for a second too long. I made the mistake of looking up. His dark eyes were fixed on me, his gaze intense and focused. He wasn't looking at me like a prop anymore. He was looking at me like a woman. And in that silent, charged moment, surrounded by the sterile luxury of his fortress, I realized the danger wasn't just outside the walls. It was standing right here in front of me. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. I was a prisoner in a sky palace, a ghost haunting rooms that held no warmth. Minjun was a phantom himself, disappearing for hours, sometimes entire days, leaving me in the silent company of his guards who stood like statues by the doors. I learned that the rival faction, the ones who had ambushed us, were the Kim clan. And I learned, through a clipped, angry phone call I wasn't meant to overhear, that they were the ones responsible for what happened to his sister, Hannah. It wasn't just business. This was a blood feud. His war had become deeply, irrevocably personal, and I was trapped on the front lines. One afternoon, he had to leave for a meeting he claimed was secure. He left 2 of his best men with me. "Do not leave this apartment," he'd ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. I had simply nodded. Where would I go? I was reading a book from his surprisingly well-stocked library when I heard it. A muffled thud from the hallway, followed by a sharp crack. Not a gunshot. Something else. Something heavy. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The guards were gone. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. The front door to the penthouse clicked open. It wasn't Minjun. 3 men stepped inside, dressed in black, their movements silent and predatory. They were Kim clan soldiers. My heart seized in my chest. They hadn't found the safe house. They had breached it. They had come for me. There was nowhere to run. The apartment was an open-plan expanse of glass and steel. One of them saw me, his lips curling into a cruel smirk. He started toward me, slow and deliberate, savoring my fear. Panic was a scream trapped in my throat, but my mind, sharpened by weeks of tension, went into overdrive. I wasn't his date anymore. I was his weakness. I had to survive. My eyes darted around the room. On a low table sat a heavy, sculpted glass award of some kind, a jagged piece of art. As the first man reached for me, I snatched it. It was heavier than I expected. I swung it with all the force I could muster, connecting with the side of his head. He grunted, stumbling back, surprise and pain flashing in his eyes. It didn't stop him, but it bought me a second. The other 2 were on me in an instant. One grabbed my arms, twisting them painfully behind my back. The other, the leader, pressed the cold, flat blade of a knife against my throat. The metallic scent of it filled my nostrils. "The boss is going to be very happy," he hissed in my ear. Kwon Min-jun is about to learn what happens when you take things that don't belong to you. Just then, the private elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Min-jun stood there, his suit immaculate, a briefcase in his hand. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance, his dead guards in the hall, the men holding me, the knife at my throat. His face became a mask of cold, lethal fury. It was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen. He dropped the briefcase. It clattered on the marble floor. "Let her go," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The man holding me laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what? You'll lose another woman you couldn't protect? Just like little Hannah?" The name hit Min-jun like a physical blow. The air crackled. In that split second of distraction, I acted. I stomped my heel down, hard, on the instep of the man holding my arms. He swore, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I threw my weight forward, away from the knife, and screamed, "The police are on their way." I called them. It was a lie. A desperate, stupid lie. But it was all I had. The chaos that erupted was brutal and fast. Min-jun moved with a terrifying, surgical precision. He was not a businessman playing at being a gangster. He was a predator in his natural element. The fight was over in less than a minute. 2 men were down, groaning on the floor. The leader, the one with the knife, lay unnervingly still. Min-jun stood over him, his chest rising and falling, not a single hair out of place. He had killed a man with his bare hands, and it was as natural to him as breathing. He had saved me, but I had created the opening. I hadn't just been rescued. Later, after his cleanup crew had come and gone, erasing any sign of the violence, the silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep tremor I couldn't control. I had crossed a line. I had lied to the police when they'd arrived, responding to a false alarm from a neighbor. I had told them I'd heard nothing, seen nothing. I chose his world. I chose the lie. There was no going back now. Min-jun was standing by the window again, his back to me, his posture rigid. He was staring out at the city lights, but I knew he wasn't seeing them. "Are you okay?" The question was inadequate, absurd. He turned to face me. The cold mask was gone, replaced by something raw and exposed. His eyes were haunted. "When I saw him holding you," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its usual control, "with that knife, I saw my sister's face. It wasn't a confession of love. It was something far more dangerous, far more honest. It was a confession of his deepest fear, his greatest failure. He was admitting that I, a girl who had fallen into his car by mistake, had become his vulnerability. The one thing in his perfectly controlled world that he could not bear to lose. The Kim clan had failed to take me, but they had succeeded in their mission. They had found his weakness. A few days later, a package arrived. Inside was a single photograph. It was of me, walking across my old college campus, laughing with a friend. It had been taken weeks ago, before my life had been torn apart. Tucked into the frame was a note.
"We know who she is.
We know where she belongs. Every fortress has a back door." They were no longer targeting him to get to his empire. They were targeting me to get to his soul. The danger was no longer a consequence of being near him. The danger was me. The photo was a declaration of war. My old life, my identity as Nia, the broke college student, was now a weapon aimed directly at Min-jun's heart. He wanted to lock me away, deeper inside his fortress, to wrap me in layers of security until I was nothing more than a precious object in a vault. I refused. "They think I'm your weakness," I told him, my voice shaking but resolute, as I stood before him in the vast, silent living room. "Let's use that." He looked at me, his face carved from stone.
No.
"It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous to hide," I argued, my mind racing, connecting disparate pieces of conversations I'd overheard, details I'd observed. "Mr. Park, the man from the restaurant, he's playing both sides. He mentioned the Kim clan's new shipping routes. He talked about their discipline, he admires them, but he fears you more. He's the back door." I had his full attention. I laid it all out, a plan, desperate and half-formed, but a plan nonetheless. The Kim clan wanted to set a trap, using me as bait. They would propose a trade, a meeting. They would expect him to come in guns blazing, an enraged animal defending its mate. But we would give them something else. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a high-end, traditional bathhouse owned by Mr. Park. A place of supposed truce, where weapons were forbidden. The Kim clan's leader, a man named Kim Jin-tae, would be there. He would expect Min-jun to bring an army to the gates. Instead, Min-jun would walk in alone, and I would already be inside. The hours before the meeting were the longest of my life. Min-jun's men dressed me in an elegant silk robe, my hair pinned up. I looked like a courtesan from an old film. Before I left, Min-jun stopped me. He didn't say, "Be careful." He didn't say a word. He simply took my hand and placed a small, cold object in my palm, closing my fingers around it. It was a panic button, disguised as a simple silver locket. "Only when you have no other choice," he said, his dark eyes boring into mine. I entered the bathhouse through a service entrance, escorted by Mr. Park's staff, playing the part of a nervous girl being delivered as a peace offering. The air was thick with steam and the scent of cedar and eucalyptus. I was led to a private chamber, where Kim Jin-tae was waiting. He was younger than I expected, with cruel eyes and a predator's smile. "So," he said, circling me like a shark, "you are the girl who has tamed the great Kwon Min-jun." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face a mask of frightened compliance. "I don't know what you're talking about." The plan was simple. I was to keep him talking, to play the victim, until Min-jun made his move. But plans, I was learning, were fragile things. Mr. Park, the snake, had betrayed us more thoroughly than we'd anticipated. He'd told the Kims about Min-jun's real vulnerability. Not me.
Hannah.
"He failed her, you know," Kim Jin-tae said, his voice a poisonous whisper as he leaned in close. "His own sister. Drowned in the Han River because he was too busy building his empire to see the traitors in his own house. And now he has you. A replacement. A cheap copy." His words were meant to be a blade. But he made a mistake. He'd brought a ghost into the room, and in doing so, he'd given me my strength. I was not a replacement. I was the one who was still breathing. At that moment, a commotion erupted outside. Min-jun had arrived. But instead of walking in alone, he had sent a diversion, a team creating a disturbance at the front, drawing the bulk of Kim's men away. It was a feint. The real attack was coming from somewhere else. Kim Jin-tae grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Change of plans, little girl," he started dragging me toward a back exit. This was it. The moment everything went wrong. Min-jun was cornered, his plan unraveling. I had to act. I didn't press the button. That was the last resort. Instead, I did the one thing they wouldn't expect. I sagged against him, my body going limp, and let out a sob. "Please," I cried, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't let him hurt me. My father is an architect. He's from Chicago. He'll give you anything you want." I was reciting the lines Min-jun had given me on that first night, the flimsy details of a life that wasn't mine. It was a non sequitur, the babbling of a terrified girl. But it was a code.
Kim fintai longer.
"Your father can't help you now." But the guard behind him, one of Mr. Park's men who had been watching silently, stiffened. His eyes met mine. He was Min-jun's man, placed on the inside. My nonsensical words were the signal. "The trap is sprung. Act now." The guard moved. He wasn't trying to take on all of Kim's men. He just created an opening. He lunged for Kim Jin-tae, and in that moment of chaos, I wrenched my arm free. I didn't run. I reached down and pulled the fire alarm on the wall. The entire bathhouse erupted into a cacophony of bells and flashing lights. Steam hissed from vents in the ceiling, filling the room with a thick, blinding fog. It was the final piece of my plan, the one I had insisted on. Chaos was the great equalizer. Through the mist, I saw Min-jun. He emerged from a side door like a wraith, moving through the fog and confusion with lethal grace. The fight was swift, brutal, and decisive. When the steam cleared, the Kim clan was broken. Kim Jin-tae was on his knees, Min-jun standing over him. It was finished. We drove away from the bathhouse in silence, the city lights a silent, glittering witness to the night's violence. The cost had been high. Min-jun's inside man, the one who had answered my signal, had not survived. A debt of blood had been paid. We returned to the penthouse. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything that had happened. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the empire he ruled. My old life, the girl with the pink backpack and the worn-out jeans, felt like a story I'd read about someone else. She was gone forever. Min-jun came to stand beside me. He looked at me, and for the first time, there were no more masks, no more walls. Just the man and the deep, aching wound he carried. "You should have run," he said, his voice low and rough. A long time ago. I met his gaze, my own reflection mirrored in his dark eyes. "You never gave me the chance." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was no longer a claim of ownership, but something more profound. A recognition. "I would not have let you," he admitted. "It was everything. An apology, a confession, a promise." He let his hand drop. He wouldn't talk about love or forever. Those words didn't exist in his world. Instead, he looked at me, truly saw me, the woman who had walked into his war and helped him win it. My light pink backpack was still sitting on a chair in the corner, a relic from a forgotten kingdom. I was no longer that girl. He stood behind me, not touching, just a solid, warm presence at my back, a silent guardian against the night. He looked out at the city, his city, and then his gaze settled on me. "Are you hungry?" he asked. The question was so simple, so mundane. In a world of violence and shadows, it was an offering of normalcy, a promise of a tomorrow, of a life, one quiet moment at a time. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the endless stream of headlights flowing through the city's arteries, feeling the weight of the crown I had never asked for, in the kingdom I had chosen to make my own. I was no longer a student who had climbed into the wrong car. I was the woman who had decided to stay.